I was working full-time for an evangelical organization, and they decided to have a policy you had to sign that men and women could only marry. And I said, what?
Mm.
Why suddenly are we doing this? And I couldn't sign it, but I did try for 2 years to walk on eggshells and keep their rules about not talking about it. And it was hard for me because I have a lot of friends in what we call the rainbow community.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, when my husband did a marriage for some of our friends in that community, I was invited to leave and given a date to leave by. When you're a national leader in a Christian organization, and that's not just your work, as you know, when you're part of a church or something, that's your family, that's your
Mm-hmm.
friends, that's your fellowship, that's also your job.
Hey, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. This is Tom Rondell, and I kind of lead some conversations around here around dark nights and deconstruction when you don't know how to make heads or tails of your faith and what's going on in your life and the world around us. And today I have a great conversation with Jacci Turner. We've been friends on Facebook for a while, but this was my first interaction with her in kind of a face-to-face format with Zoom. Thank you, internet and technology. And we talk about her new book, Tumbled People, which is like a journal-style book of deconstruction and reconstruction. And she kind of talks about how the deconstruction is actually a part of the faith journey, and we talk about where it fits. And so we get into like stage models of like faith formation, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and what that looks like, what it is and what it isn't. So I think you will enjoy this conversation today with me and Jacci Turner. So enjoy. Well, Jacci, it is so wonderful to have you on the Liminal Living Podcast. I am really excited to talk about your book, The Tumbled People. It just sounds really interesting. So I'm excited for you to teach us about some of the concepts of deconstruction and reconstruction. But before we dive into that, I was just wondering if you could just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you're up to these days.
Well, thank you. It's so good to be here, Tom, and I love to talk about myself. So yeah,
Don't we all?
I don't we all? Uh, so let's see. I have a lot of hats and that I've worn in the past. I worked in campus ministry for most of my life, but I also am a marriage and family therapist, and I recently retired from a job where I was doing mostly trauma therapy with women, and I love that. I've done hospice care. But right now, mostly I'm enjoying training spiritual directors through Christian Formation Direction Ministry in Nevada, and also writing a lot of books. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm at now.
Yes. Now, how many books have you written now? You've done fiction and you've done some nonfiction. So what are you up to now? What's the book count?
Yeah, I think there are 14 fiction books for young adults and middle grade, and one for grown-ups in there. And then there's my new book, Tumbled People, Deconstructing and Reconstructing Your Faith, which is actually my first nonfiction.
Oh, really? Well,
Yeah.
that's like an epic. So that would be 15 books total,
Yes,
which,
and there are four on my computer waiting for my attention.
so
I like to write.
you are just is all the letters wearing out on your keyboard now? Because so many
Yeah,
books.
really.
Wow. 15 books. That is epic. That is wonderful. So what are your spiritual roots? Like, what is the soil that Jacci has come out of in the past?
Well, it's fun to think about that because I always thought, in the evangelical sense of the word, that I became a Christian when I was in high school through a group called Campus Life, because I had a very clear, adult salvation moment. But actually, interestingly, I also did that when I was 5. And my Sunday school teacher in my little Baptist church, we lived in a tiny town and there was just one church. So I don't know that my parents went, but I went. I was interested. And I remember my Sunday school teacher telling me if I asked Jesus into my heart, he would come and live there, and I could ask, pray, and he would answer my prayers. And so that was very real. But even before that, when I got baptized as a teenager, my mom came out and said, "What are you doing?" Because we were doing it in our backyard swimming pool.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "I'm getting baptized." And she said, "We had you baptized when you were born, like in the Methodist church." And I didn't even know that. So my roots go back much further than I was ever aware of until I started really processing it.
So you have a little bit of Baptist, a little bit of Methodist in there.
And then a long period of nothing. And then when I met the campus life people, then I started the non-denominational church, part of my life. And that was the largest part until the last maybe 9 years going through deconstruction. I've found my way to more traditional churches. And currently, I'm not in a church. I go to a small group of other people going through deconstruction, and I'm very, very happy there.
Now, you said your deconstruction has been a 9-year journey. What was the spark, or what was the first domino that fell? Was there a question? Was there a moment?
The biggest
experience?
domino that fell was I was working full-time for an evangelical organization, and they decided to have a policy you had to sign that men and women could only marry. And I said, "What? Why suddenly are we doing this?" And I couldn't sign it, but I did try for 2 years to walk on eggshells and keep their rules about not talking about it. And it was hard for me because I have a lot of friends in what we call the rainbow community.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, when my husband did a marriage for some of our friends in that community, I was invited to leave and given a date to leave by.
Oh, wow.
And that sort of helped my deconstruction process.
That moved it along quickly, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Because, we call that hitting a wall or, moving into a dark night or whatever, but it's a very tumbled experience and very disorienting when you're a national leader in a Christian organization, and that's not just your work, as you know, when you're part of a church or something, that's your family, that's your friends, that's your fellowship, that's also your job. When all of that goes away overnight and suddenly you're suspect, I got uninvited from teaching at women's retreats, and everything just dried up overnight, and it was very disorienting for me.
Wow. Yeah. I think there's that like consolidation of power of, we are your community, we are your family, we are your house of worship, we are your authority. So stay in line. And
yes,
then when you can't anymore, it's like you lose everything, and you don't have a community and a church and a family, and everything just kind of falls apart. That must have been a really lonely experience.
It was. And I remember my husband and I saying, well, how do you find your people then? If they don't congregate in place, that's easy to find. How do you find them? That sort of was a big deal for us, feeling lost in that sense that we don't have any people. So it took us a while to find other people going through just deconstruction as well.
Yeah. And a lot of the people that have reached out to me through this podcast have said the similar things, that they've lost their sense of community and their people. Some are now agnostic, or some are secretly atheist, or some are holding on to as little dogma as possible, but they're not accepted in a church. And they say, we feel alone and isolated. How did you find those people, or were they just kind of on the journey joining you as you traveled? Like, how did that work for you?
Well, the first thing that happened was we felt like, if I'm willing to be fired over this issue, that we should do something for our rainbow family. So we started a group called Shalom, and it was for people that had been hurt by the church for being gay. And that was beautiful because those people had no judgment of us, and they certainly had more persecution than we ever experienced. And it was just a nice, warm place to land. We did that for 3 years, and it was healing for all the people involved, including us. But everybody kind of graduated. We're all still very close friends, but that group eventually dissolved. And in the meantime, we started going to different kind of churches. We went to Disciples of Christ, and they were open and affirming. We found our way to the Methodist Church, which is open and affirming. So Slowly, we just found other people through those places that were more open and affirming because I just couldn't go into a church after that wasn't
Mm.
affirming of my dear, dear friends.
Yeah, yeah. That makes me really sad. You picked the name Shalom for that, and I know a lot of the roots of that word. It's a beautiful word, but some of our listeners might not understand. Why did you pick the word Shalom? What does that mean for
Yeah,
you?
you probably know more than I do, but I researched it and it talked about how shalom was not just peace, but also wholeness
Mm-hmm.
and inclusion, everybody welcome at the table kind of idea. And I just thought, oh, this is unity, this is wholeness, this is everybody, this is the word we want.
That is beautiful. It is, yeah, it's kind of translate. I did a academic paper on it once, and
Tell us.
and it was translate like shalom in the Old Testament is the word for peace and salvation and well-being and wholeness, and it's
Mm,
interchangeable for all of those. And then when the New Testament was written, they didn't have a. It was written in Greek, so they had to choose
mm,
different words. And so you can follow the translation of shalom into Greek through the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament. And it's actually translated, it's the word for salvation, sozo. It's the word for peace, which is eirene. And it's the word telos, which is the Greek word for perfection, but not in like perfect, like we would think, but like something's created end, like what it was intended to be. And it means
wow.
all of those things all in one. So it's so beautiful that you picked that word. It's one of my favorites of all time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Created as it was meant to be. I love that.
Yeah. So it is the Bible's word for salvation, not just getting saved from heaven, but
Right. It's so much
reestablishing
bigger.
things. Yeah, it is so much bigger.
Yeah.
So you wrote this. This is your first nonfiction. You've done 14 fiction works. So this is your first
Yeah.
nonfiction. Why did you write this book? What was it that says I have to write this? Like what was that motivation?
Yeah. I st- so when I started working with Christian Formation Direction Ministries, which I'll call CFDM from now on, um, Catherine Gregg, Douglas and Catherine Gregg started it. And Catherine is just this incredible teacher. And she would come into some of our trainings and do teaching on the stages of spiritual development, which I had never really heard about until that moment. And it just gave me words for my experience. And I love writers that give me words for my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it really made sense to me that we all go through these stages that are predictable across all religions, just in the same way that we do when we're growing physically. We have to crawl before we can walk and all of that. Well, that we all go through these stages. So we start out in these rather black and white stages as children. And that's why we talk about David and Goliath and Noah and flood. These kids need rules. They need to know that, there are good guys and bad guys. But that's not a stage you want to get stuck in, which I think our whole country is stuck in right now.
Mm-hmm.
The us, them, goodbye, good guy, bad guy thing. And then we move into stage three, which is this wonderful, connected stage where you do feel part of a group. So I did that. I started in college with my involvement in a Christian organization that I ended up spending most of my adult life with, and I felt very connected. You learn all the grounding of your faith, how to study the Bible, how to pray, how to share your faith. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful stage. But something usually comes along where you hit a wall. And for me, it was when I was invited to leave that organization. And that leads you into stage four, spiritual direction or faith, which is a very confused, cranky, cranky stage where you're mad at everybody and you don't understand what's going on. And you
Oh
just,
yeah.
that's your deconstruction, right? You're like kind of rethinking everything. And if you can get through that with the help of spiritual advisors, like spiritual directors, then, you can move on into stage five, spiritual stage where you're it's like you have a basket and it's bigger and you can collect things from different places that feed your soul.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe in the past you wouldn't have read Rumi as a poet, but now you're like, oh, Rumi's actually got some good things to say.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you wouldn't take yoga because you thought it was scary. And now you're like, oh, yoga is a great exercise. So, it's like your faith gets bigger and God gets bigger and you're just more open. And when I was going through that and those learning about those stages really helped me, I thought, I need to start sharing this information. So I have a blog. It's called Spiritual Practices 101, where I just take spiritual practices and make them very easy to access. And I did that. I've done that for 8 years. And so then I thought, well, why not put this whole thing in a book,
Mm-hmm.
when I was on the other side of the bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
and understand that it's all part of the process and it's very normal and God is good, where I could write from that perspective.
Yeah, I know, like when you hit that wall, there's just so much anxiety that hits you about, oh no, I've lost everything. I'm no longer, in the faith. I can't belong to this. And there's just so much anxiety around that because of the authority that kind of the fundamentalist understanding is that gatekeeper. And they say, well, if you don't stay within our boundaries, then we kick you out and you're no longer, and they exercise that power. So you're saying that like this deconstruction process is a natural part of the faith journey.
It is. And as far back as Teresa of Avila, she wrote about it in the Interior Castles book,
Mm-hmm.
about this going deeper. And that, what you're talking about, that force, that physical force, that pushes you out or tries to pull you back in the world of therapy, and we call that homeostasis. So when if you grow up in an alcoholic home and you try to get better, the family system tries real hard to pull you back into line. Or if you have a baby monitor over the baby or a baby, what were those things called? Mobile, yeah.
Yeah.
And you push it so it moves, but then eventually it comes back into homeostasis. So the same thing happens in a faith organization when you try to leave. There's a lot of pressure to get back in line. People say words like slippery slope.
Yes.
You're on a slippery slope. Can I take you to lunch? And they try to pull you back in. But if you think about it organizationally, most organizations never move beyond stage 3 faith, because people that are in stage 3 give their money, they give their time, they give their resources, and organizations can't live without that. So trying to take a church into deeper stages of development can be a very tricky situation, which as a pastor, I'd love to hear if you're succeeding at that.
We are succeeding, actually, because the larger an organization gets, then the more of a threat change becomes. But if you can remain, I like what Seth Godin says, as small as is sustainable. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of been my goal. I don't want to just get big for big's sake. I want to remain as small as is sustainable for authenticity to remain, and to create as safe a place as possible for people who are going through. I mean, like, everybody goes through questions and doubts and hard times and pain and struggle, and then we just pretend that it all makes sense to us because that's what we're supposed to do.
Yes.
And so if you can just create a safe space that says it's okay to doubt, and it's okay that you're in deconstruction, it's okay you're claiming atheism for right now. It's not about how you can like mentally cram information in your head and then say that you agree with it. That's not what belief is. Belief is just, like, the biblical word belief is trust. And that's totally different than, agreeing and conforming to like propositions. So it's just, when you can understand that a church is not about getting people to agree with your propositions, it just gives you a whole lot more freedom. But it also means that you have to stay as small as is sustainable so that those propositions are not going to be demanded from the people with the
Yeah,
monies and the people with and there has to be a diversity in that. So it is tricky, but it is doable.
it's
And
doable.
I think it is the way forward. I don't think megachurch is the way forward. I don't think hyper conservative is the way forward. I think love, inclusion, and safe spaces are going to be the way forward for the future of the church. And that's going to look a lot differently, and that scares a lot of people because that does disrupt the homeostasis of things. So,
Yes.
a lot of paychecks rely on things remaining
That's
homeostatic.
right. That's right. Buildings and heat.
Yes, and building. I like the buildings. I like the heat. I like the paycheck. But there is something bigger happening that we got to
Yes.
keep in mind. That this is about guiding people's souls towards God and that expression of love. What Paul said in Galatians, that it's faith expressing itself in love. That's the point.
Right. That's the point. And that's where we're headed. I mean, all the stages of faith, that's where they go, right?
Yeah.
The ones beyond, the ones I've experienced are about unity and love, unity with each other, unity with God and love, the greatest commandment. I mean, that's where we're headed.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that that's what's happening in the world right now, that God is shaking up the church, breaking off the calcification, taking us back to unity and love.
Mm. Now you mentioned like the stages, and you just kind of like did the stone across the water kind of a version of it. And I'm really interested in like the understanding. Can we kind of just spend some time on how you understand the stages of faith?
Sure.
And maybe just like tell us, what is stage one? What does that look like?
Well, I love that you brought up trust, because stage one is a trusting stage. And generally, when you're a baby, if you're born into a trusting family, a loving family, a safe family, then it's easier for you to understand God as someone you can trust.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, many of us aren't. So then we need to go to therapy to get to that place.
Yes.
But it's interesting because we go in a big circle, really. And at the end, we're coming back to that place where we can just trust God for all the things we don't understand, that childlike wonder and mystery.
Mm.
So that's basically stage one. Stage two is the real black and white, good and bad stage. And that's very appropriate for children. But when you get stuck there, you might have a bumper sticker that says, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no room for discussion in stage two.
So
right?
if you're, I just gotta, like, if you, say that you had an experience, a come to Jesus moment evangelically as a teenager, did you arrive in stage one? Did you move on to stage two quickly? Like, how does that work? Because you mentioned a child and a baby in stage one. Like, what about someone entering the faith just like immediately as an adult? What does that look like to be in a stage one or a two?
Well, I think, and I think the stages are flexible, right? We move back and forth. We cannot jump stages. We can't go from 2 to 4 because we have to go through 3, but we can go back and forth through stages we've been in. So, but because as a child, I was very spiritual. And I had a very mystical relationship with Jesus. I would pray, Jesus would answer very concretely. I think I did those 2 stages before I got to my high school experience. That one was a very stage 3 experience for me.
Okay, I think I get it. Like there's almost like when we are children, like there is just a trust if we are healthy. There's just like this, because I had mystical experiences when I was a child. When I was like 7, I remember walking around Sam's Club with my family as they're shopping, and all of a sudden I was hit with this like understanding of consciousness itself. As a 7-year-old, I'm like, I am a conscious being. This is me, and I'm in a world, and I'm just like looking around in amazement at the fact that I exist. And then I was then looking at myself saying, are other 7-year-olds thinking these thoughts? This is weird. So you're saying that could have been like an early trusting stage 1 place of faith?
And children are very mystical beings. They're always questioning, they're always interested, they're very curious. I think it's a beautiful thing, if it doesn't get squashed along the way.
I love that. That helps me understand stage one. And then we move into stage two, which is kind of like the black and white, right and wrong.
Yeah.
We don't put our
It's
elbows on the
scaffolding. It's
table.
scaffolding.
Ooh, scaffolding is a good way.
Yeah,
So,
you don't cross the street without looking both ways or you get run over. Those are important things to know.
yeah. And that black and white thinking then translates into the faith as in evangelical circles, as in the Bible said it, I believe it, done with it.
That settles it.
Give me my bumper sticker, I'm going to heaven. So I have arrived. We are good.
Right.
But then you move into a stage 3. Describe stage 3, and is there like a transition process, or is that just kind of like you just naturally get there? What does stage 3 look like?
I think we probably naturally get there, but I think it helps to be exposed to other people at that point. Like if you go to college and you've always been told, Hindus are bad or something, and your roommate's Hindu and you really like your roommate. And it kind of opens your eyes to the fact that, hey, maybe the world isn't black and white. Maybe the world is actually more gray. And maybe Hindus aren't bad people, and you start to be exposed to life where you travel. And then it opens your horizon. So then you move into a more, oh, God is a little bigger than I thought. Everything is not black and white.
So it's like an expansion of your understanding and your capacity to see God at work in the world. And it's not just in these small little doctrinal, dogmatic categories that I had, but it's a little bit bigger than that.
Yes. And then usually that's when people find some kind of a fellowship or congregation where they learn the language, right? Each one has their own language and culture and expectations and rules. So you flourish in that environment. It can be a beautiful thing. During stage 3, if you're in a good place. I can imagine it could be a terrible thing if you're in a very judgmental place. But
and that's the place where you're like, I am a part of this group, and then that like gives you meaning when you're a part of a group and you're a part of a community with a shared narrative, and then you have a role to play within that narrative. One of my favorite modern philosophers is John Vervaeke, and he talks about, there is the arena and agent arena relationship, he calls it. Whereas we create these arenas in our world, and then we become agents within the arenas where we have a shared narrative and we're part of this in this specific way. It gives us meaning, gives us purpose. And like a football player goes in and they're in uniform and they're throwing the ball back and forth. There's a specific expectation, there's rules, this is how we do this. And that agent arena relationship in a football, but if you take that football player and put him in the grocery store and they start playing football in the grocery store, it all of a sudden doesn't fit there. So like the deconstruction process is when like you realize your arena was just an arena and not ultimate reality. And when that arena falls apart, so does your meaning, and so does your community and your purpose. And all of a sudden, where's my shared narrative? Where's my purpose in life? Where's my meaning? And it kind of crumbles. But it's also an expansion, just as if you grew up in a room like a closet and you thought the closet was reality, and then the walls fell down. You'd be a little bit scared at first, but then you'd look around and say, wow, it's a really big world. So what moves you into that is the wall stage 4, or is the wall before stage 4?
The wall is generally before. It's between 3 and 4. And I mean, all of these things are movable, but I think we hit a lot of walls in our life. But usually it has something to do with something big that happens, like a divorce or a sickness or a great loss or politics or, coming out as gay or whatever it is. It's something that shakes up that arena you're talking about and makes you rethink, oh, maybe there's more, or maybe I'm not getting what I need inside this place. Maybe I should look out at other places, something like that.
So a wall is something that you've encountered something that doesn't fit in your current understanding, your current arena that you've had, and all of a sudden you don't know what to do with your faith or your life with these questions, these doubts. I like what Richard Rohr says: the only thing powerful enough to change us is either great suffering or great love. And like that moment when you encounter either of those things, that becomes powerful enough to move you. But that wall, I mean, that's a painful experience to look at the world as you used to know it and you used to embrace it no longer makes sense to you, but it still makes sense to all those people over there, and they might be friends and they might be family, and now you don't want to say anything because what are they going to think of me?
Exactly.
And that creates so much anxiety, that wall experience, but you're saying it's essential to growth. How do you
It is, and once you
through?
get on the other side, you can't unsee the new things you see, right? The world is bigger. God is bigger than I thought. You can't unsee that.
Yeah.
You can't go back.
You can't
You
go
can
back.
try. You can try.
It's a painful thing to try and fit into a place that your vision has expanded beyond.
Yes.
Because it causes you to question yourself and your sight sometimes. There's the gaslighting that happens from the authority structure that says, oh no, it's not that way. It's just you're being led astray by the devil or the liberals, or if there's even a difference, that whole thing. It's all about like maintaining the control of the arena, because it's our personal empire that we have built. So how does one process that wall? Like, it's a dark night, it's a deconstruction, it's a hard time. How do you get through the wall?
Well, personally, I recommend a spiritual director at that point, someone who can help shepherd you through that. I had a wonderful spiritual director that I met with once a month and cried to for years. Or, the therapists are good too, or a small group of friends that will hold you well and allow you to just process, because it's a lot to process.
I've found with spiritual direction that it is a safe space, because there is no like vested interest. When I direct people, like, I'm not trying to get them to a place. I'm not trying to make them Christian again, or make them conservative again, or make them Baptist again. I am just accompanying them on their journey, wherever it's unfolding. And I'm kind of, being one who's explored the spiritual formation routes and contemplative and mystical paths. Like, I know, I may not have traveled their path specifically, but I know how to travel. When you get a guide for a long hike, they may not have been on this specific hike before, but they know how to hike. They know how to travel. Yeah. They know what tools you're going to need, and the essential practices, and what plants don't eat and what plants do eat. Like directors seem like the guides on the journey. And even if they haven't been on your specific path, they've been on a path and they know how to journey, and they're so helpful, and the work they do is really helpful. And therapists as well are so wonderfully helpful. Do you have to have a guide to get through a dark night or a deconstruction wall? I know it's important, but what if somebody can't find one that they connect with?
I guess the pandemic has helped us a lot now, because you can pretty much find one online.
Yeah.
You can go through Spiritual Directors International, find someone willing to meet with you online. But also, I have found my whole life mentoring through books. I'm a big reader. I love to read Richard Rohr and other people who, again, give me words for my experience, and then I don't feel so alone. The problem with not having somebody like that in your life is it's easy to become bitter at this point. And if you think about older people that they kind of go into camps. They either become bitter, angry people, with sharp edges, or they become beautiful, sweet, soft people with smooth set edges, which is the analogy from my Tumbled People book.
Oh, kind of like a
Um,
tumbled rock.
yeah, like a tumbled rock, all the edges get broken off if you allow them to be. But if you don't, you can become pretty bitter at that point and angry.
Hmm. That is, I just now putting it together that the the title of the book is like a tumbled rock. My family does a lot of rock collecting. We love rock collecting. They're
Yes.
so beautiful. And that when you go through the wall and end up on the other side, like you're talking about like a smooth rock versus a hard, jagged piece, does that mean on the other side of a wall, like there is no anger and you're just kind of amiable and just easygoing? Or is there still like a fiery passion for things? Like I don't want to confuse just on the other side of the wall, then my problems are
Everything's
gone and
rosy.
everything's rosy and I never get angry again or irritated. And, like,
No, remember I said that stage 4 is the cranky stage where you're angry and bitter and
yes,
processing all
the,
those feelings and if you can make it to stage 5, then things are a little better. But in stage 6 and beyond, if you think about the people we think of as really spiritual beings, say for instance, Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi, they're probably people that are in stage 6 or more of spiritual development. I don't know that all of us will ever get there on this side of the earth, but they were human, right? Mother Teresa was said to be hard to work with.
mm-hmm,
Martin Luther King had affairs, and Gandhi was supposedly mean to his sons. So we're always going to be on this side. Um, we're always going to have some sharp edges. So it's a
mm-hmm.
life work. It's not going to just suddenly get better, but the goal is to continue moving forward toward unity and love.
Okay. So we talked about the wall. The stage 4 is the cranky
Cranky
stage,
outsiders, that's
right?
what I call them, because
And
you're on the outside now.
now you're on the outside. So we've gone in between stages 3 and 4 is the wall. What does that stage 4 look like, and why are we so pissed off?
That's the deconstruction phase. And, these things can go on for years, decades, or whatever. But that's when we question everything we believed previously. Well, if I'm saying that I can love gay people now, what does that mean about the other things I believed?
Mm-hmm.
And so you start to question and things, prayer becomes different. Like, I think it becomes less verbal, more contemplative. I might have had a prayer list that I prayed every day before, but now I can sit and just be in the presence of God and learn those contemplative practices, which are really important during the rest of our lives, for sure. And this book, I put contemplative practices all the way through. And one of them that I love for stage 4 confusion is the welcoming prayer, where we sit with what we consider negative feelings like anger or being betrayed or whatever the feelings you're having at that stage, confusion. Sit with that feeling and welcome it as part of you. Like, okay, obviously you are a part of me. I'm here with you. Welcome. What do you want me to know?
Mm.
Is there something I'm missing? How can I help? And sort of welcome those parts of yourself that are hurting, and that can be really transformative.
Yeah, that's really powerful. As a 9 on the Enneagram, I'm very uncomfortable with my anger because I'm afraid of my anger. And a friend of mine is a therapist, and he told me that I've probably never felt my anger before. Not saying that it's not there, but I don't allow myself to feel my anger. He says, because as soon as you recognize anger, it transforms into anxiety. He says you probably never have given yourself permission to feel anger because it translates right into anxiety right after that. So you don't
Wow.
enjoy the experience of anger because it just translates immediately into anxiety about having anger. And so it just made me really aware of like, oh, so different emotions feel differently in my body at different times.
Hmm.
And being a 9 and not liking to disrupt things and just stay calm and peaceful, whenever I encounter the negative emotions, it just immediately translates into anxiety for me. And having that welcoming space, I can see that being very, very helpful instead of being anxious about my anger, just kind of
Mm.
welcoming it in as a messenger and saying, what do you have to teach me?
Yeah.
Why are you angry? That could, because when people go into that deconstruction phase, even this week, people have messaged me and just they said, you know, I'm, I'm just so scared of what
Mm.
these people in my life will think if I told them that this is happening. And so
Yeah.
they're not actually in the moment as it is. They're anxious about what is
The
instead of feeling it
future.
as it is,
Mm.
you know? And that's really, so stage 4, you're able to see, okay, these are the negative things that I'm experiencing. Negative emotion, we'll call them negative, but they're not really negative, are they? They're just
No.
emotions.
Right.
But these are the emotions that I'm experiencing that I perceive as negative, and they have a message to give me, and I can sit with those. Like, what have you found practicing that? Like, what have you found come out of that? What have you learned about yourself in that moment?
I think a really good point that you brought up about people being scared. I think that when I sit with anger, I usually realize that I'm scared. And anger for me is a defense to protect myself from fear. And so then I'm like, okay, what am I scared of? Well, yeah, people are going to leave me if they could. And in reality, they did. My brother unfriended me on Facebook. He's a pastor. My
Mm,
best friend unfriended me. She didn't want anything else to do with me. I mean, these things are true and they're painful. Um, but do I miss them? Actually, no, I don't.
mm,
I don't have to walk on eggshells anymore around those relationships because I can be who I am and I can say what I believe. And I feel now that I can just let those things sort of Teflon off me
mm-hmm,
because I've been through it now for so long. It's like, yeah, okay. I mean, one of my reviews on the book it was a great review, but at the very end, they said, I hope I came back to God. And I'm like,
mm.
okay, that's okay.
There's
I'm
an
glad you,
anxiety in that statement.
yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm closer to God than I've ever been. And I love Jesus, but people just assume that I've, fallen off the deep end or whatever. And that's okay with me now. I don't
Mm-hmm.
feel that intense fear about it because I've had that happen in real life and it wasn't that bad.
It's not that bad. Oh wow, that is that made me laugh. um, you know those moments are scary when we think we are going to lose our community and our friends and our family, and but you're saying there's life on the other side, and that life is
Yes.
more free because you don't
When
have
you
to fake it anymore.
don't have to fake it, you can be who you were, you try to find your true self and
Mm,
who your true self is a loving and open person, then that's who you can be.
mm.
And but it's so hard when it's family. And on Facebook, there's a great group called Raising Unfundamentalist Children.
I'm a part of
And
that one.
yeah, isn't that a great group? And I
Mm,
just think it's wonderful because people can come on there and say, oh my God, I'm going home for Christmas and this is going to
mm,
happen and I'm really scared. And people support each other. So we need those people who are like, you're okay, we've got you,
yeah.
praying for you, got your back.
So would that be more like you're entering into that stage 5, like you're just becoming a little more comfortable on the other side of the deconstruction process? I guess, what is stage 5 and what does that look like? What does it entail?
Yeah, stage 5 is where you got that bigger basket and you can put more things in it now. And that's where people get nervous that are still in stage 3. When you start, I'm very interested in Celtic spirituality, and I love the earth, and I love Quaker spirituality, and those things, when I talk about them, being born, and instead of being born in sin, being born in original blessing, those kind of things just fill my heart with joy. And when I talk about them, it makes a lot of people really nervous, but they just give me joy. And I'm not going to stop talking about them because I think they're very freeing.
You sound free when you're saying it, because you're just like smiling as you're talking about it. And that, I have been a student of Zen Buddhism for a while. And, the teenage me would look at the me of today and just think I've fallen off the bandwagon. It's like, you practice meditation? Oh my goodness, what is going to happen to you? The devil's going to get in your mind and give you all these lies and deceptions. And that was because I was in a stage 3. And there is so much like spiritual depth to the Zen Buddhist tradition that gives me practices. I don't consider myself a Buddhist. I still consider myself a Christian, but there is a way of being a Christian that can like draw in these practices from Zen Buddhism. And it's funny, like yoga used to be like whoa, we don't do yoga, that's a religious thing. And now it's just like there's yoga studios on every corner. But there was a time when we didn't do that, like
that's right.
I'm sure there's still churches that don't do that. But, meditation was one of those things for me as a kid. I was like, we don't do that because that opens your mind to the evil one. And yet in that stage 1 trusting, I would have like moments as a kid where a meditation would come over me, and I would just be just like in a meditative state of just absolute serene peace that I wish would never end, and just being kind of confused about what is going on here. But my brain was just in a meditative state. And then I did some study on meditation for a couple of years. Just like, I just wanted to know like what is actually biologically and physically going on in me. And it just, what it does is it takes your brain and puts it into like a state like you're sleeping. And I don't know any Christian that would say sleeping is going to open you up to the devil. But then meditation, it's like really weird. But yeah, my younger self would have looked at the me that meditates and say, what you should not have a basket that big. That is scary. How would you encourage someone that might be in that stage 4 cranky realm, and they're looking at stage 5 and saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I might be open to, and then, a different spiritual practice or perspective than they're comfortable with? What would you say to them?
Well, I like to read. So I went through a stage after I left stage 3. I went through a long period, many years actually. I couldn't open the Bible. I had been reading it faithfully for 40 plus years, and I just could not do it. It was very triggering to me, the military language and the very male-centric language. So I didn't. But when I read books by people like Phyllis Tickle or John Philip Newell, and I get scripture sideways, like it's coming, but it's coming in through the side door. Then I can hear it, and I can hear it in new, fresh ways. And so I might encourage people to try, just some books, or if they don't like books, podcasts like yours, places where they can hear things coming in from a different angle, and maybe it will give them words to understand what's happening. And they can latch onto those as anchors to help them not feel so afloat and adrift in the sea of uncertainty.
Yeah, that coming through the side door I love that picture. I had somebody, when I started this church that I'm at now, I had somebody that was just very science-minded, and they never felt at home in a church because they were science-minded, and churches don't believe in evolution and all those sciencey things, but I do because I'm like a science person. And they also had a very bad experience with a very conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical friends group. So they said, I can't read the Bible. And I told them, you don't have to. And they just looked at me like I grew a second head, and they said, you're my pastor and you're telling me I don't have to read my Bible? And I said, not if it's going to do all this triggering inside of you, that read something else. And I said, try Rachel Held Evans, try Richard Rohr. And I gave these side doors in because I'm in a place where I haven't been able to read Paul for a couple of years because Paul triggers an old fundamentalist in me. And it feels like I have more work to do unteaching Paul than I would have to actually teach what it is. And it's like, I'm too tired for that. So I'm just sticking with the Gospels for right now.
I don't have energy for that anymore.
But Howard Thurman gave me permission to do that. The spiritual writer, Howard Thurman, who was Martin Luther King Jr.'s mentor. And in his book, Jesus and the Disinherited, he talks about how his grandmother would have him, when he was a kid, read the scriptures to him, but she gave him strict rules. Do not read Paul to me, unless it's 1 Corinthians 13, love chapter. But do not read me Paul. You read me the story of the Exodus. You read me the Gospels. And he said, why, Grandma? Why do you not want me to read you Paul? She says, because the white master used Paul to inflict slavery upon me, and I don't want to hear it again.
Wow.
And that was like, Howard eventually was able to read Paul in a new light, and he's a brilliant mind. But that just kind of, I guess it gave me a freedom to where I could say, Paul's in the Bible. He's not going away. I don't have to read him right now. I can just stick with the Gospels for a while, and that's okay. And when I was able to offer that to another person, they're like, well, I can't even read the Bible right now. And it's like, that's okay. Sometimes we just need to clean off our glasses before we can read again,
Yeah.
And,
that's so true. When I had the Shalom group, they were very specific about not wanting to hear from Paul, and also, certain parts of the Bible. And so we did Gospels, and then we did Nehemiah, which they loved, and then we did Esther, and I did not know what was coming. They loved Esther because she's living this closeted life, and then she has to come out of the closet and make this difference in the world, and they all really related to her. Wow. And I thought, oh my goodness, that was beautiful. I didn't see that coming.
Wow, I wouldn't see that coming either, but I'd love to hear their understanding of Esther. When I grew up, Esther was always given from a patriarchal lens where, you got to win over the king. And if you can do that, you're good. And really, it's a subversive story about, she's being sex trafficked, and she is trying to survive and save her people at the same time. And she has to use whatever she can to get through it. And when I looked at the book of Esther through the non-patriarchal lens, at the end of the book of Esther, it praises all the men, and Esther doesn't get any praise, and that bothered me. And then I looked at the book of Esther as a whole, and I said, wait a second, who else is not mentioned in the book of Esther?
Jesus.
God. It never mentions God in the book of Esther. It's the only book of the Bible that never mentions God. And I taught on the book of Esther here at this church, and I mentioned that fact. I'm like, you might be irritated that Esther is not praised here, but she's actually, in this interesting way, she is actually grouped into this category with God. God isn't mentioned, Esther isn't mentioned, but they're the stars of the story. And then all these other men are like soaking up the attention and the praise. And we're supposed to see that and say, well, that was dumb. But look at,
and
but
she's celebrated every year in the Jewish community.
Yeah.
How many stories are celebrated every year?
She has a whole festival.
Right. There's a whole festival, and she's the hero.
Now that's stage 5 with the bigger basket. And then kind of like that stage 6 sounds almost unattainable, because when I have sainthood in my mind, I think of somebody who's not me, who doesn't think the thoughts that I think and do the things that I do and have all the flaws that I have. What
Mm.
is stage 6 like this? You become like Yoda, and like you just like you never even touch the ground because you're like floating through Earth. Like, what does that look like, do you think?
I don't think so. I think it's more about single-mindedness or single-heartedness. If you think about the people I mentioned, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he was focused on justice, and he was not going to drop it, even if they beat him and even if they threw him in jail, even if they killed him, that he was going to do that. Or Mother Teresa, she was single-hearted. And I don't think all of us are called to do these giant things, but I think that we all can be single-hearted toward the world, trying to have God's eyes for people, seeing people as sacred beings, opening our hearts to those on the margins. If we can live like that, I think we will move toward that kind of love and unity.
Mm-hmm.
But, who's to say if we ever reach it? I don't even know how to contemplate that.
Yeah. Now, when you mentioned like the wall, you mentioned burnout, you mentioned dark night of the soul, you mentioned deconstruction. Is there a difference between these things, or are they the same thing, but like a different side of the coin? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's different. Yeah. Is it the same name for the same thing?
I think that hitting a wall can lead to a dark night. I don't think they're necessarily the same thing, because I don't know if I've experienced a dark night. I read John's book, St. John of the Cross, and I think all those saints were really tumbled. I mean, they were beat, they were jailed, they were mm-hmm. So maybe that's why they had to. I mean, he was in jail a long time. That'd be a dark night, mm-hmm. with the threat of death hanging over you constantly and being tortured. Anyway, I don't know, but what I learned from John was that even if you're going through a dark night, it doesn't mean that you don't feel God. God is still there. And I never doubted that when I was going through stage 4. I never doubted that God was with me in it. And he gave me dreams. He gave me support. He gave me love. So I don't know. I don't know that they're the same thing, but I think that hitting a wall could definitely lead to a dark night.
Mm. As I understand a dark night, it's a time when God is not felt or perceived by the normal senses of which you would perceive God. It's a time when you not only can't feel God, but even in cases don't want God. And you're just like those dark night experiences are when you become like that purified, single-hearted person, where because a lot of times we're following God because of what we get out of the God deal. If I'm good, then I go to heaven, or if I stay in line, then I keep my community, or if I pray, then I get answers, or I feel peace, or I have a sense of security. And like everything about our relationship to God in like the earlier stages is tied to a positive thing that we're going to get out of it. And then that dark night hits, and there is no way to make sense of it because there isn't anything positive about it. And it's a way that God purifies our love, so that we're not just affiliating because of what we're getting out of the deal, but we become single-minded and hearted. And it's not that we necessarily return back to God in the way that we used to understand it, but we have abandoned and set down the old ways of relating to God, and there's a new way, and that new way looks very different for lots of people. For some it might mean I can't identify as a Christian right now because there's all of this baggage that goes with it, but or I don't even want to be a Christian right now, or I don't want to read my Bible right now. But then new passions arise up but I really want to see justice for your rainbow family. I really want to see justice for, racial reconciliation, and this, like, finding God on the other side of a dark night is finding, that the passion that you have to bring some kind of justice to the world, regardless of what you get out of it. It can really purify your will, as you said, become, single-minded, single-hearted.
Yeah.
I don't know how that fits into the stages model or anything, but it's, as you said, I don't think that the stages have to be linear. I mean, you do have to progress through them like you grow up, but at the same time, you can go back to cranky stage on a bad day, or,
or go back to stage 3, us and them, thinking when the politics don't go your way.
Right.
I get really self-righteous, and I'm like, hey, I'm sort of doing the us them thing. That's not good either, right?
I'm with you on that one as well. Or you can go back to black and white. It's like, how can you see? It's not just, it's justice. We want this, we want that. I was looking at your book and some of the little blurbs that people wrote about it, and I noticed a name that I really liked, and it's David Hayward. He runs the Naked Pastor. He does beautiful artwork and cartoons. But he said this book is like a spiritual map and just may help them realize that they aren't lost, but they are on a very clear path of spiritual progress and growth. Like this book can help people understand that this deconstruction process is not you falling off the path and losing your way and ended up in the woods somewhere. But there is a point to this. This is a part of your journey and a part of your pathway. And I think he captured that really well in that statement. Is there, how does... I was
so glad he said that he would do that.
I know. I want to talk with David one day. That'll be really nice. But you've kind of made the book like a journal almost, so that people don't just read it and get information, but you're actually like, here's your spiritual practices and here's your journaling section. Can you kind of talk about how that book is constructed?
Yeah, I just really had a vision for it being something you could write in. I like to write in books. I'm one of those nonfiction books. I write in them, and that bothers some people. But this book you're supposed to write in. It has pages that you can journal after the end of each chapter, because I want people to engage with it, play with it, and try these practices. And, everybody relates differently to spiritual practices. So for me, I love silence and solitude, but there was a period in my life, being an extreme extrovert, where that would have been death for me. And I had to wait till I was older to enjoy it. But I love, I can't do centering prayer. Like, you're a good meditator. I am not a good meditator. I just have a real hard time with that one. So it's good to try on these different practices and see what works for you, and see if the welcoming prayer or Lectio Divina, or there's so many in the book. I do more on my blog too, but I see everything as a spiritual practice. If you go in with that intention, taking a walk can be a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Going on a trip can be a spiritual practice. So I think it's important to find some that help you during this period when maybe scripture feels like something you can't read, or it's dry, or heaven feels like iron, you can't pray. It's good to have other options.
Well, I appreciate you writing this helpful guide to kind of help people through, as almost like a spiritual director in book form, to kind of walk with them and accompany them. I think it can be very helpful. Where can people find this book? Where's the best place for them to buy it, I would say?
Well, it's great to buy on Amazon for me. And if you read it, write reviews, that always helps an author. But it's also available in Barnes & Noble and places, but probably you would have to order it from them. It's available, but I don't know if they will keep it in store.
Okay. And if people wanted to follow you on some of your social places, what's the best place to follow you at?
Well, my name is spelled funny. It's Jacci Turner, but it's spelled Jacci. And I am on almost all social medias as at Jacci Turner or at Jacci Turner Author. So I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. You can find me anywhere. And I have a website, which is JacciTurner.com.
And 2 C's on the Jacci.
2 C's, Jacci.
All right. I had it wrong on my notes, so I'm going to correct it on my notes so that it'll be correct in the podcast notes as well.
Good.
Well,
yeah,
Jacci,
my mama did that to me.
Well, I thank you so much for being on the podcast today and sharing your story and your heart and your journey and this book. Thank you for writing this book and putting it out in the world.
Well, thank you for having a podcast where we can talk about these important things.
We got to do it. It's got to happen somewhere. Let's do the grassroots.
Yes, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. If you could do me a favor, and the internet algorithm gods up in the clouds, they have not recognized me yet on the podcast. Some people are looking for the podcast and they can't find it. So if you could, por favor, pretty please, go and subscribe, go and rate, go and review on whatever platform you're using, whether it's SoundCloud or Apple or Spotify or TuneIn or wherever else, wherever you're listening to it now. If you could do those things, that will help other people find me in this podcast and us in our conversation. So if you would do that, that would be awesome. And we'll see you next week. We have another interview coming up, and it will be a good one. I'll talk to you then. Peace out.